Good morning and welcome to The Art of Composition. Thanks for joining me today. I appreciate it. So I thought I would look at the photographer Vanessa Winship. And I came across Vanessa's work on Lens Culture. And if you haven't checked out Lens Culture, check them out because I think they're one of the better photography websites out there. If you've been following my website before, you know that I pretty much hate 99% of the photography websites online. And the reason is because it's all about camera gear. And the modern photographer, they have to get past that shit because it is not going to help you to improve your body of work. And if you're into photography for the art, you have to stop obsessing over camera gear, Lightroom, and Photoshop, and all those other distractions that take you away from creating real art. And there's a lot to learn when it comes to taking a photograph that is considered art. And unfortunately, photography is very deceptive because it looks like anybody can take a photograph. Well, anybody can take a photograph. You don't have to be an artist to take a photograph, but you do have to be an artist to take photographs that are considered art. And I've been called before by some of my visitors as the Gordon Ramsay of the art of photography world. And the reason I'm called that is because I'm very blunt. And I'm very blunt because I'm trying to drive the point home that if you want to create art, you have to be trained as an artist. And that applies to photography, even though the art of composition is approached differently than the artist that goes on the canvas. However, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter because what you end up with has to have artistic qualities to be called a work of art. And one of those is design. And I teach design and I teach a lot of other things as well. But that's one of the reasons I focus in on composition so much is because without a good composition, a photograph is not a work of art. And Kenyon Cox said this in the book, A Classic Point of View. He says, without design, there may be representation, but there can be no art. In other words, you can take a photograph of an apple, but that doesn't make it art. You're showing your audience it's an apple, but it's not necessarily a work of art. And if you're constantly fixated with these websites out there, you have the Steve Huff types of photographs or websites where they sell camera gear. And then you have the Art of Photography by Ted Forbes. That's sort of a, I call it a National Enquirer of the photography world. It's entertainment and it's interesting if you put it in that light. But when it comes to learning anything, they're only interested in selling camera gear through Amazon links or B&H links and t-shirts and all that other crap. And that's fine if that's your goal, if you want to make a living at that. But if you want to be an artist, you've got to pull away from that stuff. It's fine to watch, if, like I said, if you're looking for entertainment. But if you're looking for real information on how to create art, you have to go to art books. And there are a few photography books that I do recommend and videos, but they are so far and few between that are any good. All right. Anyway, let me take a look at Vanessa's work and I'll point out a few things. I have not looked at Vanessa's work at all. This is the first time I'm seeing it. So what I'm going to do, like all my other video lectures, it's a series called A Closer Look At. And what I do is once a week or so, I'll pick a photographer that I come across or that I like, and I'll look through the work and I'll possibly point out a few things. And for me, there are two reasons that I do this. One, I'm still learning myself. And two, if I can voice my opinion on things that stand out because of my knowledge on design, it might help those that are willing to sit through these video lectures. And I guess, thank God they're free, because I don't know if anybody would pay for these, but you really should just to help me out. But anyway, I'm just kidding. Let me take a look around her website. It's interesting. I was reading in The Essence of Photography, and Bruce Barnbaum was stating that you hear photographers talk about the prime times of day to shoot. In other words, you have early in the morning and later in the evening, you have really good light. And I agree with this, but it shouldn't prevent you from photographing during the hours in between that. And when I was peeking through some of Vanessa's work, I noticed that she's not following that guideline. A lot of her photographs, it looks like they were taken on cloudy days, so it creates a different mood. But don't restrict yourself to those hours of early in the morning or late in the evening, because you're not giving yourself enough opportunities to take more photographs. And when I go out and do my own photography, I'm very much aware of that. If there are time periods during the day that aren't good, for example, if I'm at a craft fair or if I'm at a fair or an exhibit or whatever, and I'm photographing and I know the light outside isn't good, I'll pop into a room or something where something else is going on and I'll photograph to take more photographs, but sort of get around some of the bad lighting conditions that you're faced with. And like I said, Bruce Barnbaum does talk about that in The Essence of Photography. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because I was looking at this photograph and it looks like it was taken on a cloudy day, and it's an effective photograph. Simple landscape, nice values in the black and white print. But what's interesting is you have this movement here, the stirring of the water. And without this elliptical movement here, the photograph I don't think would be as strong, because it's creating this nice pattern in the water right here. And it gives the landscape a little bit of energy that otherwise wouldn't be there. I love this. And the car fits nicely within the framework of the trees. Notice here in the front of the car, it's being framed in by this tree trunk here. But also notice how this curvilinear element in the tree, the larger tree here, it's being repeated. You have these curvilinear elements, and it's sort of a repeating theme, even in the small cracks in the road right here. So you see a pattern, you see a repeated curvilinear element. Simple photograph, but depending on where the photographer stood, this car, if the photographer moved to the left, these elements that frame in the car would have shifted. Interesting. I'm just sort of evaluating this for the first time. I won't say anything about that one. This is nice. Nice, deep, dark values, but you can still see detail in the shadows. And for me, this is what stands out. And of course, you have the energy of the birds moving around. But you can see within the dark areas here, they're not pure black. Nice portrait. And some of these I'm not going to say much because I'm just poking around looking, but it's interesting. When you're doing portraits, I've noticed that a lot of photographers, this is where the style comes out, because you could approach this subject in many different ways, and you could set them against many different backgrounds. And the background to me says a lot about the portrait. You have this girl that is dressed up nicely against basically ruins in the background. It's an interesting contrast, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. And the same thing here. It looks like this is photographed in an alleyway. And this woman, I assume it's a woman, sort of looks like a man dressed like a woman because the size of her hands, I can't really tell. But anyway, the background says a lot about the photograph. It really, if this person was photographed anywhere else outside of an alleyway, it wouldn't have the same impact. And it's somewhat jarring. And like I said, I think it's interesting when photographers approach portrait work and how they select their backgrounds. This reminds me of Stephen Shore. The image is flat in the sense it doesn't show any dimension. You're looking straight on in a building, so basically all you have is a dominant horizontal line here. There's, and possibly here, I guess. This is great. I like how the subjects are not looking in the camera at the photographer. And this figure is framed in nicely behind the windows and the doorway in the background. And obviously this figure stands out. You got really good figure ground relationship. I like the angles in the feet. And I love this motion right here. They're sort of oblivious to each other, which is interesting, even though this person's touching. I can't tell if they're touching his ear or whatever. This looks like Stephen Shore. This one for me, I find more interesting than this one, compositionally speaking. This has a little bit more dimension, and I like the 3 cars in the front. This is beautiful. This reminds me of Vivian Maier. Good figure ground relationship. A simple portrait, but not simple in the sense that it's easy to get these beautiful black and white value tones as well. Nice. This is what I was talking about when I was talking about the other day about value rendition in black and white prints. This is gorgeous. This definitely reminds me of Vivian Maier. There's a moment in time when you're photographing people where they get lost in themselves. And Cartier-Bresson used to call this an inner silence, I believe. It's a brief moment when you're photographing your subject and they almost forget that you're there, even though they can be looking directly at you. They get lost in thought. And you can tell that in a photograph, and I can tell that in this photograph. She's staring at the photographer, but it's almost like she's not even aware she's there. It's like you get lost in thought. And that's a difficult thing to capture, and it only happens for a brief second. But when I look at this photograph, that's what I see, this inner silence. And I believe Bresson mentions that in his book on portraits. This is great. The first thing that stands out for me in this photograph is the overlapping in the trees. And I've talked a lot about overlapping in some of my other video lectures. Depending on how you move left or right or even up and down will determine how these elements all overlap. And this photograph has such three-dimensionality to it because of the position the photographer is standing in relationship to the trees. If she moved left, it would have changed these overlaps and it would have flattened out the image. And I do stress that technique a lot because it really does matter. This is interesting. A lot of negative space here. But for me, it works. And I know you go online and you hear, what is it, the rule of space or something like that. Those concepts, they don't mean anything. They really don't. What do you have? The rule of odds, rule of space. Leading lines. Leading lines has to do with perspective. But anyway, the rule of space, it just kind of made me think of that concept when I saw this negative space. But you have to dive deeper than that. That concept is so lame. It's meaningless. It doesn't mean anything. But for me, this amount of space around the landscape works. And I think it's very effective. You know, I generally, when I shoot, I don't leave this much space, but again, there are rules in composition, but you have to know how to break them. I won't say anything about this one. Simple idea. I like to see this printed a little bit darker, but I like it. Your photographs don't have to be complex. In fact, the best ones that I've seen are simple in design in the sense that they're not overly cluttered. This is great. This is a very good portrait. The darker hat reads nicely and it's framed in nicely here. And I look for the small elements that surround it. You have a little bit of space between this mid value here and this darker shape here. And these are the things that I look for and you should look for in your own work. Same thing here. Nice crop. Again, when I'm looking at her portraits, they have that inner silence. That moment when they're aware of you, but they're sort of not aware of you. They get lost in thought, and that's what I'm picking up when I look at her portraits. Nice path through here. Beautiful. Again, you have this elliptical shape here. It creates energy. And it's creating energy in a very basic landscape. This is nice. Stands out. Good figure-ground relationship. It's interesting, too, that I noticed with her subjects, there's not a lot of animation in their limbs. They're not doing any real, what's the word I'm looking for? Their poses aren't dramatic. They're basically almost like mug shots, but they're effective. You have a little bit of movement here, but not a lot. This is nice. You have this curvilinear element coming down here. It moves you in here. And you sort of sweep around. You're moving around in this fashion. You can come in and move up. Or you can come down and move around. This is lovely. Great photograph. Same thing with this portrait. You do have a little bit of animation here, but with the crease in the shirt, you're creating a little bit of movement here. I definitely like her portrait work. Oh, this is great. Fantastic. Good figure-ground relationship. Simple composition, uncluttered, but very effective. You have the turning of the head of the deer. It's pulling you in this direction, so it's enhancing this diagonal line here. And this billboard sort of brings you back a little bit. Because the text is on this side, it's forcing you back. Nice, very nice. This is great. Nice energy right in here. Again, damn near, it's like a vertical line straight up. But you have this horizontal line here breaking the vertical. You have this dominant vertical here, but then this horizontal at the top sort of brings you back, kind of pulls you back in the frame. This is nice too. Same thing. I do like the slight turning of the body though. But again, what I find interesting about her portraits is the backgrounds. The subject stands out from them, but they're not the most flattering backgrounds. But I love these portraits. They're really good. Nice. She likes a lot of space at the top. And I like this cut here. Beautiful. Let's see what else she has here before I cut this. This is nice, very dramatic. It reminds me of a photographer that I met. I believe it was in Maine. His name was Jocko Vasilov, I believe. But you have this right here, which is kind of pulling you in. I like this. This is a beautiful portrait. But again, you have these two verticals. This is, in my opinion, the dominant vertical right here because the subject is closest or taller. She's a little bit closer than her, but she's also taller, so this becomes the dominant vertical. But it's being broken by this horizontal here. My eye goes right here, also because she's down the center of the frame. And it's interesting, my impression of this as well is that because in my opinion, the secondary subject is her, she's being balanced out by this element right in here. If you put your thumb over this element, and if this was all one value and you didn't have this diagonal line right here, I don't think it would have been as balanced. And I do talk a lot about balance and composition because that's just as important as the design aspect of it. Like I said, if you put your thumb over this area, it would change the balance. It weighs it out on this side. And if you squint, you can see that as well. But yeah, this is your dominant vertical, and then this is your dominant horizontal line. And it's being balanced. This girl's being balanced by this element right here. One thing I noticed too is that she keeps the feet very close to the edge. And notice in this one, you have your two subjects here, but they're balanced out on each side, whereas the other one was not. This one hangs a little bit more to the right, but again, like I said, it's being balanced here. But in this one, they're more balanced from left to right. One, because the background, if these were more to the right, like this one here, you wouldn't have anything on one side or the other to balance it out. You need something on the other side. When you have a subject here that's close to the edge, and you have your dominant vertical dividing the frame, you have to have something on the other side to balance that slight imbalance out. And here, she doesn't have that in the background, so they're better suited in the position they are, which is more centered. You could divide this right down the middle. This arm movement is critical in this portrait. This bend of the elbow, because you have a direction coming in here and here, but this elbow is bringing you back to her. So you can shift your subject a little bit to the right because this bend in the elbow creates a triangular shape right here. Okay? And it helps pull you back a little bit to the left-hand side, even though she's further to the right. If she was just straight, it wouldn't work as well. If she had her arm down, it wouldn't work as well. She has a slight twist in her hips. Even though she's standing straight here, she has a little bit of a bend in her hips. And it's bringing you back around from falling too close to the edge. Gorgeous. And the same thing here. Here's your center line, but you have this figure further to the left, but to balance that out, you have this element, and I think this is a chalkboard possibly in the background, I'm not sure. But if you covered that area with your hand, you would see how it balances out these elements on the left-hand side. And again, your portraits are clearly separated from the elements in the background. These are fantastic. These are phenomenal photographs. Notice how she's framing in the shoulder blades with the rooftop here. And you have this small window here, creating a balance for this heavy figure on the left-hand side. This is a heavy weight on the left-hand side because she's the tallest of the two. So you're creating a weight here, but you can balance it out with this small window here and this window as well. But if you put your thumb over this small window, it would change the balance. And that's called the Steelyard principle. Small weight, larger weight. If you covered that smaller window, it wouldn't have the same impact. All right, I think that's going to be it for today. I've talked, I would say, enough about Vanessa's photographs. She's amazing. If you haven't checked her out, check her out. Thanks for joining me today. I appreciate it, as always.